"Sir, I can't accept this." Emily Carter's voice was quiet, but the words landed harder than any argument could have. The man across the table looked at the envelope between them, then back at her. Inside was $1,000 in cash. $1,000. For Emily, it was more than a month of groceries. It was nearly 2 months of rent. It could pay the overdue electric bill sitting beneath a magnet on her refrigerator, replace the worn shoes her 5-year-old daughter had outgrown, and still leave enough for the prescription Emily had been putting off buying for herself. Yet her hand remained steady as she pushed the envelope back across the white tablecloth. "It's a tip," the man said. "You earned it." Emily shook her head. "I earned the amount on the check. Not this." For a moment, the noise of the restaurant seemed to fade. Silverware clinked softly against porcelain. A piano played somewhere near the bar. Warm golden light spilled across the polished tables, catching the edge of the envelope as if the money itself were asking her to reconsider. Emily did reconsider. She thought about the nearly empty pantry waiting at home. She thought about Sophie asking that morning if they could buy strawberries because she had seen them in a grocery store window. She thought about the landlord's reminder taped to her apartment door. Then she looked at the envelope again. "Thank you," she said gently, "but I only take what I earn." The man studied her with an expression Emily could not quite read. His reservation name was Ethan Bennett, but to Emily, he was simply another quiet, impeccably dressed businessman sitting at table 12. To Emily, he was simply another wealthy businessman who had spent more on dinner than she could spend on groceries in a week. She had served hundreds of customers like him. Some snapped their fingers. Some never looked up from their phones. Some left generous tips and expected gratitude in return. Ethan had been different from the beginning. He had thanked her every time she refilled his water. He had noticed when she carried an extra chair over for an elderly couple at the next table. He had even complimented her for calming a nervous little girl whose mother had struggled through dinner. Emily had smiled and moved on. She was too tired to think much about it. At 29, exhaustion had become part of her routine. She worked 6 nights a week and picked up extra shifts whenever someone called out. By the time she got home, Sophie was usually asleep. On the rare evenings when her daughter waited awake, Emily made sure she never saw how carefully she counted every dollar. Tonight would be another late night. Her shift ended at 11. The bus ride home would take almost 40 minutes. There would be dishes waiting, a lunch to pack, and a little girl who might wake up asking for water. Emily reached for the envelope one more time, not to keep it, but to slide it toward Ethan. "Please don't take this the wrong way," she said. "I'm grateful. I really am. But if I accept money just because someone feels sorry for me, I'll never know whether I'm standing on my own." Ethan's expression changed, just slightly. Something in his eyes softened. "You think I feel sorry for you?" Emily gave a small, tired smile. "I think you're generous." She paused. "That's not the same thing." Ethan leaned back, silent. Outside the tall windows, city lights shimmered against the dark evening sky. Emily gathered the empty plates and turned away before he could say anything else. She had no idea that the man at table 12 was the billionaire CEO of Bennett Hospitality Group, the company behind the restaurant where she worked. She did not know his name appeared on business magazines across the country, and she certainly did not know that, for the first time in years, Ethan Bennett had just met someone who made his money feel strangely powerless. As Emily disappeared through the swinging kitchen doors, Ethan looked down at the untouched envelope. Then he looked toward the clock. 11 o'clock was still more than an hour away. But suddenly, he had no interest in leaving when his dinner was finished. By the time Emily stepped through the kitchen doors, the warm glow of the dining room had disappeared behind a wall of stainless steel, steam, and hurried footsteps. She tied her apron tighter and picked up the next tray, forcing her thoughts away from the envelope she had just refused. $1,000. She could still feel the weight of the decision in her chest. Not because she regretted it, but because she knew exactly what that money could have done. At the end of the shift, Emily would count the cash in her wallet twice before taking the bus home. She would stop at the grocery store only if there was enough left for milk and cereal. She would probably tell Sophie that strawberries were too expensive this week, then promise they could buy them another time. That was how Emily lived now. Not dramatically, not hopelessly, just carefully. Every dollar had a destination before it ever reached her hand. She carried another tray toward table 12 and noticed that Ethan Bennett was still there. His dinner was finished. His coffee sat untouched. The envelope remained on the table. Emily slowed for half a second. She expected him to be angry. Instead, he looked almost thoughtful. "Everything all right?" she asked. Ethan lifted his eyes. "You work here every night." "Most nights." "When do you sleep?" Emily smiled faintly. "When my daughter lets me." That answer made him smile. It was the first time Emily noticed how different he seemed when he was not surrounded by people. Earlier, she had assumed the expensive suit, polished watch, and quiet confidence meant he was another man who had never worried about a late rent payment. Now there was something less certain in his expression. "How old is she?" he asked. "5." Emily glanced toward the clock. "Her name is Sophie." She immediately realized she had said more than she usually did with customers. Maybe exhaustion had lowered her guard. Ethan nodded. 5 is a good age. She thinks it is the age when she gets to make all the decisions. Emily laughed softly. "Sounds familiar." "Does she?" "No," Ethan said. "I just know someone who used to think that way." Emily placed the coffee cup closer to him. "Then you survived." "Barely." She smiled again and returned to work. For the next 40 minutes, the restaurant slowly emptied. Families gathered coats. Couples paid their checks. Chairs scraped softly against the floor as servers cleared the last tables. Emily moved from one task to another, wiping counters, restocking glasses, folding napkins. She did not notice Ethan watching the room. He watched the employees more than the customers. He noticed how tired they looked. He noticed who stayed late. He noticed how Emily thanked the dishwasher before leaving the kitchen, even though she was clearly exhausted herself. At 11, Emily finally removed her apron. She checked her phone. There was one message from her babysitter. "Sophie is asleep. She asked if you were coming home soon." Emily stared at the screen for a moment, then typed, "Tell her mommy is on the way." She slipped the phone into her pocket and walked toward the employee exit. Ethan stood a few feet away. "Emily." She turned. "Yes." He held out the envelope. "You left this." She looked at it and shook her head. "It was never mine." "What if I told you it was not a tip?" Emily frowned. "Then what is it?" Ethan hesitated. For the first time that evening, the billionaire who was used to having an answer for everything seemed unsure what to say. "Consider it an offer." Emily looked at the envelope, then at him. "An offer for what?" Ethan did not answer immediately. Emily waited for a beat, then gave him a polite nod. "Good night, sir." She stepped out into the cold night air before he could respond. Ethan watched her disappear down the sidewalk toward the bus stop. A few seconds later, he picked up his phone. He looked through the restaurant window toward the bus stop, then paused. He knew following someone home would cross a boundary. He also knew he wanted to make sure she got home safely. "Stay behind her bus," he told his driver. "Keep your distance." There was a pause. Ethan added, "If she gets off safely, we leave." He did not know what he expected to find. Maybe he wanted proof that her refusal was only pride. Maybe he wanted to know why someone who needed money so badly would turn away from it. Or maybe, for the first time in his life, Ethan Bennett wanted to see the world from someone else's side of the window. What he was about to discover would make that $1,000 envelope feel like the smallest part of the story. The bus arrived with a soft hiss, its doors opening beneath the pale streetlights. Emily climbed aboard with one hand wrapped around the strap of her worn handbag and the other holding her phone. She was tired enough that the seats seemed to blur for a moment. But when she saw an empty place near the window, she sat down and finally allowed her shoulders to relax. Across the street, the dark sedan pulled away from the curb and stayed several car lengths behind. Emily never noticed it. She leaned her forehead against the cool glass and watched the city slide past in streaks of yellow and white. She thought about Sophie. She thought about the envelope. And she thought about the strange man who had offered her money without asking for anything in return. She wondered why he cared. Then she dismissed the question. Wealthy people lived in a different world. Maybe kindness was simply easier when you never had to worry about your next grocery bill. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. She had been awake since 5 that morning. She had packed Sophie's lunch, prepared oatmeal, walked her to school, rushed to her first job, and then taken the afternoon bus across town for her evening shift. Her feet ached. Her hands smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and coffee. Still, when her phone buzzed, she smiled immediately. It was a picture from her babysitter. Sophie was asleep on the couch, one arm wrapped around her favorite stuffed rabbit. Emily saved the picture without thinking. "Almost home, sweetheart," she whispered. The bus continued through quieter streets until the buildings became shorter and older. At the next stop, Emily stepped off. She walked 3 blocks past a laundromat, a small grocery store, and a closed bakery with handwritten signs in the window. The night air had turned colder. Emily pulled her coat tighter and quickened her pace. Behind her, the dark sedan remained several car lengths away. Inside, Ethan watched without speaking. His driver kept the distance he had requested. "Sir," the driver said carefully, "we can stop here if you want." Ethan looked through the windshield. Not yet. He had expected to see something different. Perhaps a comfortable apartment. Perhaps a relative waiting with a car. Perhaps some sign that Emily had exaggerated how difficult things were. Instead, every block seemed to make the truth harder to ignore. She reached an aging apartment building with a flickering porch light. Emily checked her phone before entering. Then she smiled. A small figure had appeared behind the glass door. Sophie. The moment Emily stepped inside, the little girl ran toward her. Mommy. Emily dropped her handbag and knelt. Sophie wrapped both arms around her neck. You came home. Of course I did. Emily kissed the top of her daughter's head. I always come home. Ethan watched from the parked sedan across the street. He could not hear their conversation, but he could see the change in Emily's face. At the restaurant, she had looked exhausted. Here, she looked different. Softer. Lighter. As if the entire day had disappeared the moment her daughter touched her. Sophie took Emily's hand and led her upstairs. A few minutes later, the light in one small apartment turned on. Through the thin curtains, Ethan could see Emily moving around the kitchen. She opened the refrigerator. She paused. Then she closed it again. Ethan's expression tightened with concern. A few minutes later, Emily placed a small bowl of cereal on the table for Sophie. She added the last banana they had. When Sophie asked where her own dinner was, Emily smiled and said she had eaten at work. Ethan looked down. He had heard the same answer from people before, but somehow it sounded different tonight. He watched as Emily poured herself a glass of water instead. Sophie began telling her about school, waving her hands excitedly as she described a drawing she had made. Emily listened as though there were nothing more important in the world. Ethan had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Investors wanted decisions. Executives wanted approval. Strangers wanted favors. Yet here was a woman who had refused $1,000 and was now sitting in a small apartment, pretending she was not hungry so her daughter could finish the last banana. He reached for his phone, then stopped. For once, money did not seem like the answer. Take me home, he finally told his driver. The sedan started to move. Ethan looked once more at the small, glowing window upstairs. He did not know why he had needed to see it. But now he understood that Emily's refusal had never been about pride alone. She was trying to protect something more important than money. Emily did not know that Ethan had been watching from across the street. Inside the apartment, the world had become smaller and quieter. Sophie was curled up on the couch with her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her chin, talking sleepily about a drawing she had made at school. Emily sat beside her, listening carefully, even though her body was begging for rest. Look, Mommy, Sophie whispered, holding up a sheet of paper. This is us. Emily looked at the drawing. Two figures stood beneath a crooked yellow sun. One was tall, with brown hair. The other was smaller, holding her hand. Above them, Sophie had written two names in uneven letters. It's beautiful, Emily said. Really, really? Sophie leaned against her. Can we have strawberries tomorrow? Emily felt the question settle heavily in her chest. She smiled anyway. We will see, sweetheart. Sophie nodded, already drifting toward sleep. Emily carried her to the small bedroom and pulled the blanket gently over her shoulders. She stood there for a few seconds, watching her daughter's breathing become slow and even. Then she walked back into the kitchen. The apartment was quiet now. Emily opened the refrigerator and stared inside. A carton of milk, half a loaf of bread, one egg, a small container of leftovers. That was all. She closed the door and rested both hands against the counter. For one brief moment, she allowed herself to think about the envelope. $1,000. She could have bought groceries. She could have paid the electric bill. She could have bought the strawberries. Her eyes closed. You did the right thing, she whispered to herself. But the words did not feel as certain as they had at the restaurant. Across the street, Ethan watched the apartment building. He had never felt so uncomfortable sitting inside a car. He knew he should leave. Following someone home had not been right, and he understood the boundary he had crossed. Before he could make that decision, the front door of the building opened. Emily stepped outside again. She was holding a small trash bag. Ethan immediately lowered his gaze, suddenly embarrassed to be there. As she tossed the bag into the dumpster, headlights caught her eye. Across the street sat the same dark sedan. Keeping a safe distance, she stepped toward the curb and stared directly at the tinted windshield. Ethan froze. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Emily slowly walked toward the car. Ethan lowered the window. Cold air entered the vehicle. Are you following me? She asked. Her voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the question. Ethan considered giving an excuse. He could have said he happened to be in the neighborhood. He could have said his driver took the wrong turn. Instead, he chose the truth. Yes. Emily stared at him. Why? Ethan looked toward the apartment building. I wanted to understand. Understand what? Why you refused the money. Emily folded her arms. You followed me home to figure that out. I realize how strange it sounds. It does. Ethan nodded. I'm sorry. That answer surprised her. She had expected arrogance. She had expected an explanation that involved his wealth or his position. Instead, he apologized without defending himself. Emily looked at the car, then back at him. You don't need to understand me. Maybe I do, Ethan said quietly. But you are right. I should have asked instead of following you. Emily studied him for a long moment. Then asked. Ethan looked genuinely caught off guard. What? If you want to understand, ask me. The city seemed unusually quiet around them. Ethan took a breath. Why did you refuse $1,000 when you clearly need it? Emily looked toward the apartment window where a small light still glowed. Because my daughter is watching me. Ethan said nothing. Emily continued. She is 5. She does not understand money yet. But she understands what people do. If she sees me take something I did not earn simply because I need it, she may think that is how life works. Her voice softened. I want her to know that needing help is not shameful, but neither is working for what you have. Ethan looked down. What if someone wants to help without asking for anything? Emily smiled sadly. Then help me find work that pays fairly. Do not give me a handout. Ethan looked back at her. For the first time, he understood that Emily was not rejecting kindness. She was protecting the meaning of it. Would you accept an opportunity? He asked. Emily hesitated. Depends on the opportunity. Ethan smiled faintly. Fair enough. Emily picked up the trash bag again. Good night, Mr. Bennett. She turned toward the building. Emily. She stopped. Thank you for talking to me. She glanced back. Thank you for apologizing. Then she walked inside. Ethan watched the door close behind her. The envelope containing $1,000 was still in his car. He picked it up and stared at it. Earlier, he had thought it was a gift. Now it looked more like a question. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Bennett wanted to find an answer the honest way. The next morning, Emily woke before the alarm. For a few seconds, she lay still beneath the thin blanket, listening to the apartment wake around her. Pipes hummed behind the walls. A car passed outside. Somewhere upstairs, a child laughed, then disappeared into the quiet. Emily turned her head toward the small bedroom. Sophie was still asleep. Emily smiled, slipped out of bed, and walked into the kitchen. The refrigerator light revealed the same simple choices as the night before. Milk, bread, 1 egg. She opened the cabinet and found half a box of cereal. She counted the remaining slices of bread without meaning to. It was a habit she hated but could not break. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from the restaurant manager. Can you come in early today? We need to discuss the schedule. Emily stared at the message. Her stomach tightened. She had learned that sentence could mean almost anything. A shift change. A complaint. Fewer hours. Sometimes a meeting was just a meeting. But when every paycheck mattered, uncertainty felt expensive. Mommy. Sophie appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. Good morning, sweetheart. Are there strawberries? Emily paused. Not today. Sophie looked disappointed for only a second. Then she nodded. Maybe Saturday? Maybe Saturday. Emily crouched and fixed the collar of her daughter's pajamas. I promise we will try. Sophie smiled and hugged her. That small embrace reminded Emily why she kept going. She did not need someone to rescue her. She needed a little room to breathe. By 8:30, Emily had dropped Sophie at school and boarded the bus toward the restaurant. She spent the ride reviewing the numbers in her head. Rent, electricity, groceries, childcare, transportation. Everything seemed to rise while her hours seemed to shrink. When she arrived, the manager was waiting near the office. Emily, come in. She followed him inside. We have had some changes in staffing, he said. The restaurant is reducing evening hours for the next few weeks. Emily felt the words before she fully understood them. How many shifts? Probably 2 fewer per week. Emily nodded slowly. For how long? We do not know yet. She thanked him and walked back into the dining room. She kept her face calm until she reached the service station. Then she placed both hands on the counter and breathed slowly. 2 shifts. That was not a disaster. She had survived worse. She could pick up another job. She could work mornings somewhere. She could deliver groceries on weekends. She would figure it out. What Emily did not know was that Ethan Bennett had arrived at the restaurant less than 10 minutes earlier. He was sitting at table 12 again. No entourage. No business partners. No expensive lunch meeting. Just coffee and a newspaper he was not reading. When Emily walked past, she stopped. You are here early. Ethan lowered the paper. So are you. I work here. I remember. Emily gave him a cautious smile. Did you come for breakfast? I came to ask you something. She waited. About last night. Partly. Ethan placed a folder on the table. Emily looked at it, but did not touch it. What is that? A job opportunity. Her expression changed immediately. I told you I do not want charity. It is not charity. Then what is it? Ethan opened the folder. Inside was a position description for an administrative coordinator at Bennett Hospitality Group. The salary was more than twice what Emily earned at the restaurant. The benefits included health insurance and paid time off. There was also a predictable schedule that would allow her to be home with Sophie in the evenings. Emily read the first page, then the second. Her eyes stopped at the salary. She looked up. Why me? Ethan answered simply. Because you have experience. You do not know my experience. I know what you have told me. Emily's expression became guarded. What have I told you? Ethan pointed to the employment information Emily had voluntarily provided for the application process. You have administrative experience, scheduling experience, and customer service experience. You are qualified. Emily looked down at the folder again. Why are you helping me? Ethan answered carefully. Because you told me what you actually wanted, which was a fair opportunity. Emily looked at the salary, then at the benefits. She closed the folder. I will think about it. Ethan nodded. That is all I am asking. Emily returned to work, but the folder remained on the table for several seconds after she walked away. Ethan watched her disappear into the kitchen, then looked down at the offer he had prepared. He had expected her to say yes immediately. Instead, she had done exactly what she had done the night before. She had made him prove that what he offered was not charity. And somehow, Ethan respected her more for it. Emily carried the folder home that evening, but she did not open it again until Sophie was asleep. She sat at the small kitchen table beneath the warm yellow light, with the employment offer in front of her and a calculator beside it. The numbers looked almost unreal. The salary would cover rent without forcing her to choose between groceries and electricity. The health insurance could finally give Sophie more security. The schedule would mean fewer late nights and more mornings together. For the first time in months, Emily could imagine a life that did not feel like one long emergency. But one sentence kept returning to her mind. Why me? She looked at the folder again. She did not want to accept something simply because Ethan Bennett felt sorry for her. She wanted to know that she had earned it. The next morning, Emily arrived at the restaurant early and found Ethan already waiting. This time, she carried the folder in her hand. I read the offer, she said. Ethan looked up from his coffee. And I have questions. He smiled. Good. Emily sat across from him. Why did you choose me for this position? Ethan answered without hesitation. You filled out the standard employment record when you were hired here, Ethan said calmly. You have years of scheduling and client coordination experience. You are qualified. She tapped the folder. I want to know what you really think. Ethan studied her for a moment. I think you are disciplined. I think you handle pressure without taking it out on other people. I think you notice things most people overlook. And I think you have been working below your potential because life required you to prioritize survival. Emily was quiet. His words were uncomfortable because they were close to the truth. You sound like you have known me for years. I have been paying attention. Emily looked down. That is exactly what worries me. Ethan understood. Because of last night. Because you followed me home. Ethan nodded. I was wrong. Yes. And I am not going to pretend otherwise. Emily took a slow breath. Then tell me something honestly. Did you create this position because of me? Ethan paused. The position already existed. I asked the hiring team to consider a more predictable schedule because I realized the company was losing qualified employees simply because the hours were impossible for parents. Emily looked at him carefully. So this is not just for me. No, then I might consider it. Ethan smiled. That sounds like progress. Emily almost smiled back. Then the restaurant manager approached their table. Emily, could I speak with you? She stood and followed him toward the office. A few minutes later, Emily returned with the folder pressed against her chest. Her expression had changed. What happened? Ethan asked. She shook her head. They are cutting another shift. Ethan stood. Emily. She looked at him. I cannot lose those hours. You do not have to. That sounds like another rescue. It is not. Ethan picked up the folder. Take the interview. Let the hiring team decide. Emily stared at him. You mean an actual interview? An actual interview. No special treatment? None. No one knows you offered me the position. Ethan considered the question. The hiring director knows I recommended you. Emily immediately frowned. Then, that is still special treatment. Ethan smiled faintly. Fair point. He took out his phone and sent a short message. There. The hiring team will review your application without my involvement. Emily blinked. You really did that. You wanted to earn it. I do. Then earn it. For the first time, Emily felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not relief. Not gratitude. Something stronger. Possibility. She scheduled the interview for Friday morning. She spent the next 2 days preparing after Sophie went to bed. She updated her resume. She practiced answers. She searched through old work records and remembered skills she had nearly forgotten. Data entry, scheduling, client communication, inventory management, problem solving. She had done all of it before becoming a full-time mother. She had not lost those abilities. She had simply stopped having room to use them. Friday morning arrived with clear sunlight pouring through the apartment window. Emily wore the best blouse she owned and a simple navy skirt. Sophie stood beside the door holding her stuffed rabbit. You look pretty, Mommy. Emily smiled. Thank you. Are you going to get a new job? Emily crouched and kissed her forehead. I'm going to try. You can do it. Those 4 words stayed with Emily all the way to the interview. When she entered the Bennett Hospitality Group corporate building, she almost turned around. Glass walls rose above her. People moved quickly through the marble lobby. Everything looked expensive and unfamiliar. Then Emily remembered the envelope. $1,000. She had refused it, not because she did not need help, but because she believed she deserved something better than pity. She walked toward the elevators, holding her resume firmly in both hands. Upstairs, Ethan stood in his office overlooking the city. He could have ended the process with one phone call. Instead, he had chosen not to. Because this time, Emily was not asking a billionaire to change her life. She was asking a company to recognize what she could already do. And that difference mattered more than either of them realized. The interview lasted 40 minutes, but to Emily it felt like an entire afternoon. She sat across from two hiring managers in a quiet conference room, answering questions about scheduling, customer service, inventory reports, and managing competing priorities. No one mentioned Ethan. No one offered her special treatment. They simply listened. At one point, the senior hiring manager, Laura Mitchell, looked down at Emily's resume and asked, "You have not worked in an office environment for several years. Why should we choose you now?" Emily felt the old fear rise in her chest. Then she thought about Sophie standing by the apartment door that morning, holding her stuffed rabbit and saying, "You can do it." Emily straightened in her chair. "Because I never stopped learning," she said. "I stepped away from my career to raise my daughter, but I did not step away from responsibility. I have managed schedules, budgets, appointments, deadlines, and unexpected problems every single day. The difference is that no one paid me for doing it." The room became quiet. Laura looked at the other interviewer. Then she smiled. "That is a strong answer." Emily left the building 20 minutes later with no promise and no guarantee. She walked several blocks before checking her phone. There was a message from Sophie's teacher. Sophie had a wonderful morning. She told everyone her mom has an interview. Emily laughed softly. "Of course she did," she whispered. Across town, Ethan was sitting in a board meeting when his assistant quietly placed a note beside him. Emily Carter completed her interview. Ethan read the message once. Then he put it down. One of the executives noticed. "Everything all right?" Ethan nodded. "Yes." But his attention had already drifted toward the window. He had spent years making decisions based on numbers, forecasts, and probabilities. Yet now he found himself hoping for something he had no authority to guarantee. The hiring team made the decision that afternoon. Emily was offered the position. The salary was exactly what had been listed. The benefits were included. The schedule was Monday through Friday, 8 in the morning to 4:30 in the afternoon. No hidden conditions. No personal favors. Emily read the offer 3 times before signing. She called the babysitter first. Then she called Sophie's school. Only after that did she sit quietly at the kitchen table and let herself smile. She would begin Monday morning. When Sophie came home, Emily was waiting at the door. Guess what? Sophie dropped her backpack. "Strawberries." Emily laughed. "Maybe." Sophie looked suspicious. "That means yes. It means we can buy some this weekend." Sophie threw her arms around her mother. Emily closed her eyes and held her tightly. She had not realized how much she needed that moment. Monday morning, Emily walked into the Bennett Hospitality Group headquarters for her first day. She wore the same navy skirt from the interview and carried a simple lunch bag. The building no longer seemed quite as intimidating. The marble floor still gleamed. The elevators still opened with quiet precision. But now she had a badge with her name on it. Emily Carter, Administrative Coordinator. She looked at the card for several seconds before clipping it to her blouse. Then a familiar voice came from behind her. "Congratulations." She turned. Ethan stood several feet away, holding a coffee cup. Emily smiled. "Thank you. How are you feeling?" "Nervous." "That is normal." "Excited too." Ethan nodded. "Good." Emily looked at him carefully. "You stayed out of the hiring process." "I promised." "Thank you." Ethan took a sip of coffee. "You earned it." Emily smiled. "I intend to." They walked toward the elevators together, but Ethan stopped before entering. "There is something I should tell you." Emily looked back. "What?" Ethan hesitated. "The night I followed you home, I thought I was trying to understand you." Emily waited. "I was wrong." "What were you trying to understand?" Ethan looked down at his coffee cup. Why someone who needed money so badly would refuse it? Emily smiled faintly. "And did you figure it out?" "Partly." The elevator doors opened. Emily stepped inside. "What is the other part?" Ethan looked at her. "I am still learning." The doors closed between them. Emily walked toward her new desk, unaware that Ethan had just admitted something he rarely admitted to anyone. He did not have all the answers. For a man who had built an empire by believing he could solve almost anything, that realization was uncomfortable. But it was also strangely freeing. Meanwhile, Emily sat at her desk and opened her first assignment. For the first time in years, she was not wondering which bill would have to wait. She was thinking about what she could build next. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan appeared on the screen. "Welcome aboard." Let me know if you need anything. Emily smiled and quickly typed back, thank you. Lunch is on me when my first paycheck clears. Up on the top floor, Ethan looked at her reply and laughed quietly. For the first time, he understood that Emily had never been asking him to save her. She had simply been waiting for someone to see that she could save herself. By the third week at Bennett Hospitality Group, Emily had stopped checking the clock every few minutes. She knew where the coffee was. She knew which elevator opened closest to her desk. She knew which reports needed to be finished before noon and which meetings could wait until the afternoon. More importantly, she knew she belonged there. Not because Ethan had opened a door for her, but because she had walked through it and proved she could stay. Her mornings had changed too. She now had breakfast with Sophie before school. She could pack her daughter's lunch without rushing. She could leave work at 4:30 and still be home before dinner. Small things had become precious. One evening, Sophie sat at the kitchen table coloring while Emily prepared pasta. Mommy, Sophie said, are you rich now? Emily laughed. Why would you ask that? Because you have a badge. Emily smiled. A badge does not make someone rich. Sophie thought about it. Then what does? Emily placed a bowl in front of her. Being able to sleep without worrying about tomorrow. Sophie nodded as if that made perfect sense. Emily looked at her daughter and realized that she was beginning to understand something she had once been too tired to explain. Stability was its own kind of wealth. Across the city, Ethan was learning something too. He had begun to change the way he looked at people inside his company. Before Emily, he had noticed performance numbers. Now he noticed the people behind them. He asked managers why parents were leaving. He asked why some employees worked late simply because they were afraid to be the first person to go home. He asked whether schedules could be made more flexible without reducing productivity. At first, the executives thought it was another temporary initiative. Then they realized Ethan was serious. One afternoon, he asked Emily to join a small meeting about employee scheduling. She arrived with a notebook and sat near the end of the table. Emily shared what she had learned from years on the restaurant floor. If you give employees predictable schedules, you get unwavering loyalty and higher efficiency, she stated clearly. Ethan smiled. That is exactly why you are here. Emily shared what she had learned from years of balancing work and motherhood. She explained how unpredictable schedules forced employees to spend more money on childcare. She explained how losing even one shift could change an entire household budget. She did not speak dramatically. She simply told the truth. By the end of the meeting, the room was quiet. One executive finally said, "We never looked at it that way." Emily answered, "Most people do not, until they have to." Ethan watched her from across the table. The woman who had once served him coffee was now helping shape a policy that could affect hundreds of employees. He felt something unfamiliar. Pride. Not ownership. Not the satisfaction of having helped someone. Pride in the person she had become when someone finally gave her room to use her abilities. Later that afternoon, Ethan found Emily near the elevators. "You were good in there." "Thank you. You challenged 3 senior executives." Emily smiled. "They will survive." Ethan laughed. "You are becoming dangerous." Emily raised an eyebrow. "I thought you hired me because I was organized." "You are both." The elevator arrived. Emily stepped inside, then turned. "You know, I still remember the envelope." Ethan's smile faded slightly. "So do I. I almost accepted it." Ethan looked surprised. "Really? For about 5 seconds. What changed your mind?" Emily thought about the refrigerator at home, the empty shelves, the electric bill, Sophie's shoes. "I realized that if I took it, I would always wonder whether you saw me as a person or as a problem you could solve." Ethan was quiet. "And now? Now I know you see me as an employee." She smiled. "A stubborn one." "Definitely." The elevator doors closed. That evening, Emily arrived home and checked the balance in her bank account. Her first full paycheck from the new position had cleared. She stared at the number for a moment. It was not a fortune. It was simply enough to breathe. The next day, she stopped at the grocery store on her way home. Sophie had asked for strawberries again. This time, Emily did not stand in the produce aisle calculating which bill might suffer. She picked up a box of fresh strawberries and placed it in the cart. When she arrived home, Sophie came running into the kitchen. "Mommy." Emily smiled. "Looks like Saturday came early." Sophie reached for one, then stopped. "Can I have one?" Emily nodded. They sat together by the window, sharing the strawberries one at a time. Emily looked outside at the city lights and felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Peace. Not because someone had given her money. Not because a billionaire had changed her life. But because she had finally been given the chance to build a life she could call her own. And somewhere across the city, Ethan was beginning to understand that sometimes the greatest transformation happens quietly, when one person stops trying to rescue another and simply learns how to respect what they are capable of becoming. 3 months later, Emily stood in the kitchen before sunrise, holding a white envelope in both hands. The apartment was quiet. Sophie was still asleep, and the city outside the window had not fully awakened. Emily looked at the envelope again. This time, she did not hesitate. Inside was her official 3-month performance review alongside a promotion bonus. The number at the bottom made her eyes sting. It was not a fortune. It was not a gift. It was money she had earned with every early morning, every problem solved, and every responsibility carried. Emily folded the letter carefully and placed it in her purse. Then she looked toward the small bedroom. "Sophie," she whispered, "we're really doing it." A few hours later, she picked her daughter up from school. Sophie ran toward her, backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "Mommy, what are we doing today?" Emily smiled. "Our usual Friday stop." At the grocery store, Sophie headed straight for the produce section without hesitation, picking out their favorite box of strawberries. There was no fear, no tight calculations in Emily's head anymore. Just the quiet comfort of a routine they could finally rely on. That evening, they sat together at the kitchen table. Sophie took one strawberry, smiled, and said, "This one tastes better." Emily smiled. "Why?" Sophie thought for a moment. "Because you bought it." Emily looked down at her daughter and felt tears gather in her eyes. "Maybe," she said softly. "Maybe that is why." The next morning, Emily arrived at Bennett Hospitality Group and found Ethan waiting near the elevators. He was holding 2 cups of coffee. "One for you," he said. Emily accepted it. "Thank you." She looked at the cup. "Did I earn this?" Ethan smiled. "You can pay me back someday." Emily laughed. "That sounds suspicious." "Then consider it an investment." They stepped into the elevator. Ethan glanced at the badge on her blouse. "How is the new schedule?" "Better." "And Sophie? She likes having me home before dinner." Ethan nodded. "Good." There was a brief silence. Then Emily reached into her purse and pulled out a small photograph. It showed Sophie standing on the front steps of their apartment, holding a box of strawberries. Ethan looked at it and smiled. "She looks happy." "She is." Emily put the photograph away. "So am I." Ethan looked at her. "I am glad." The elevator doors opened. Emily stepped out, then stopped. "Ethan." He turned. "I never thank you for something." "For the job." "No," she shook her head. "For changing your mind." Ethan frowned slightly. "About what?" "About what helping someone actually means." He looked at her for a moment. "You changed my mind." Emily smiled. "Maybe we changed each other's." Then she walked toward her desk. Ethan remained by the elevator, watching her go. He remembered the night she had pushed the envelope back toward him. $1,000. At the time, he had thought she was refusing money. Now he understood that she had been asking a much deeper question. What happens when you help someone without taking away their dignity? The answer had changed more than Emily's life. It had changed his. Over the following months, Ethan approved a new employee scheduling policy. Parents received more predictable hours. Workers were given clearer opportunities for advancement. Managers were trained to judge performance instead of availability alone. None of it happened because Emily demanded special treatment. It happened because Ethan had finally listened to someone whose life looked nothing like his own. One evening, Emily was leaving the office when she found Ethan standing near the lobby doors. "You heading home?" he asked. "Yes. Sophie has a school project tonight." "Important." "Very. Apparently, I have been assigned the role of assistant artist." Ethan smiled. "Good luck." Emily started toward the door, then turned. "You know, I kept thinking about that $1,000. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And keep that envelope in your desk," Emily said. "Save it for when you meet someone else who needs a break. Just don't hand them the money. Build them a doorway, and let them walk through it themselves." Ethan nodded. "I will." Emily walked into the evening light. She had entered his world carrying nothing but determination, a tired smile, and a belief that her work had value. She had left something behind that money could never purchase. Ethan stood by the glass doors and watched her disappear into the city. He had once believed wealth meant having enough to give anyone anything. Now he understood something different. Sometimes, the greatest gift is not $1,000. It is a fair chance, a little trust, a door that opens without asking someone to surrender their dignity. Emily had never needed a billionaire to save her. She had needed someone willing to see what she could become. And Ethan, for the first time in his life, had learned that the richest thing a person can give another is not money. It is the chance to stand on their own.